And lo, a ghastly face appears on the internet. Hello everyone and welcome to this 4,000 subscriber special. I'd just like to say thank you to everyone who has subscribed and helped Rails Story grow over the last 18 months and for all of your really informed questions. I've not been able to answer all of them, but I've answered the most interesting. So let's get on with the show. There have been a few questions about different wheel arrangements, about 440s, 260s, 462s and all that. So in answer to Charlie Flockhart, Max Z and Thomas All, the first 440 was developed in the United States in 1836 by a chap called Henry R. Campbell, and he took out a patent for it in 1836. In February 1836, it was basically a glorified Stevenson patentee with the leading wheels taken off and replaced by a bogie. The 440 came about due to the quality of the American track. The track was often very lightly laid with little or no ballast and sometimes used obsolete technology such as wooden rails with straps of iron screw on top. A technology from the earliest railways in the 18th century and designed for horses and not locomotives. Some lines like Lexington and Ohio even use stone sills with an iron strap rail on top. It didn't possibly work and none of it was at all really suitable for locomotives, but I've digressed. So basically the bogie came about to help keep locomotives take the sharp curves and help them follow the often uneven track. In Britain, the first 440 was a broad gauge tank engine. It was built for the South Devon Railway to a design by Sir Daniel Gooch in 1849 and was built by Stephenson's in Newcastle. Several British builders built 440s for export in the 1850s, including Kitson's of Leeds and Hawthorne and Newcastle, but the design was not considered suitable for British service. So the first successful standard gauge 440 in Britain came along in 1859-1860. It was designed by William Booch of the Stockton and Darlington Railway and was built in Newcastle by the Stephensons. In terms of the 260, they are again an American innovation, largely due to the poor track conditions and the heavy weight of the trains. And the first 260 in America was built in 1860. The first 260s in Britain were built by the Great Eastern Railway, designed by William Adams in 1878 for working heavy coal trains, but they were all done with and scrapped by 1887. To go with the 460, again another American design, and this time developed by Norris of Philadelphia as early as 1847. The earliest 462s or Pacifics again originated in the United States, and these were all conversions from earlier 460s, mostly in the 1880s. The first true Pacific, i.e. which was one designed and built from scratch, was in fact built by Baldwin for service in New Zealand in 1901. The first European Pacific was built in France in 1907. Quick slurp of coffee. So, on to 14XX's question about Norris. The story of the Norris locomotive in Britain is a sorry tale of flim-flam and snake oil merchants, I'm afraid. The Norris Company put out literature in English, French and German extolling the virtues of his locomotives and their hill-climbing ability. And a great many were suckered in by this advertising rhetoric. And amongst them was the Birmingham Gloucester Railway in Britain. The Birmingham Gloucester had to contend with the incredibly steep Lickey incline in Gloucestershire, and that company approached Norris on the basis of his advertising literature about ordering 3 extra large versions of his A-class locomotives. At the time the Birmingham Gloucester requested the information on these locomotives, they did not exist, they weren't even on the drawing board. But Norris promised to build these 3 extra locomotives weighing in at 20 tonne, so long as the Birmingham Gloucester purchased 10 other locomotives which they simply did not need. So they were fleeced out of several £1,000s buying 10 locomotives they didn't need in order to get the 3 that they wanted, these 3A extras. In total, The Birmingham Gloucester ended up with 3 20-ton A extras, 3 A-class and 7 B-class. 3 more A-class were built by Benjamin Hick of Bolton and a further 7 by Naismith Gaskell. They were all of very variable quality. Apparently they included an alarming quantity of cast iron, including apparently the slide bars and, can you believe it, the axles. And it was found under test that their much lauded hill climbing ability was due to the boiler pressure not being the 50 psi advertised by the Norrises in their literature, but in fact over 100 psi. Some French railways took a few Norris A's on experiment, but didn't like them either. But the type did prove more popular in Germany and Austria, and some companies, in fact, in Germany and Austria, started building copies there. Continuing our Americana theme, Sir Liv asked about American railroad history. The biggest problem I have on my side of the pond is access to sources and the sheer number of the companies which existed and their lack of records and record keeping. It's a case of one doesn't know if a line kept any records, and if it did, where on earth are they now? That, and there's an awful lot of myth making, even in the 19th century, which made the American railways the firstest, mostest, bestest, etc. So it's quite difficult for a British railroad historian to access American sources and to untangle reality from the myth. In terms of YouTube collaboration, I had a pint with Chris Eden Green the other day, so watch this space. Richard Swiderski or Swiderski asks about Rocket and Lion. Rocket had a very short working life of less than 4 years, if that. Basically, it was obsolete from the January of 1830 when the squadron service versions of the Rocket type came into production and entered service in Liverpool and Manchester. And all of them, Rocket, Arrow, Dart, Northumbrian, Comet, Meteor, etc., were all completely obsolete in October 1830 when Planet came along. Rocket spent 1829 to 1830 working permanent way trains, ballast trains and whatnot, and then it was used sporadically as a standby engine and hired to other companies until 1833, when it was laid up and it was then sold off in 1836. Regarding Lion, that locomotive spent its entire working life on the Liverpool-Manchester route, either under ownership by Liverpool and Manchester Railway from 1838 to 1845, the Grand Junction 1845 to 1846, and then the London and North Western Railway until downgraded to ballast duties in 1857, and then sold out of service in 1859. So it had a working life of 21 years, which isn't bad. That modelling bloke asked about horse-worked railways and which was the last one in operation. In the United Kingdom, that was the narrow-gauge Nantley Railway in North West Rails. That line was engineered by the Stephensons in the 1830s, and it was still using horses until it closed in 1963. It was the last railway owned and operated by British Railways to be operated solely by horses. Horses are still used as motive power, of course, and a horse tramway is still in operation on the Isle of Man. Isaac Della Rosa asked which is my favourite locomotive from my videos. And that hands down has to be Planet, but then of course I am biased. I love her to bits. Lion comes in very, very close second, but I suspect that comes from writing a book on her and having climbed all over it inside her, etc. And I also hope that answers all course questions about my favourite early locomotive. It's Planet or Lion. In a similar vein, Dave Shockwave asked about my favourite narrow gauge engine, and without a doubt it has to be the Bayer Peacock tank engines for the Glyn Valley Tramway. They are wonderful, they look like steam tanks, they are so ugly, they are beautiful, I love them to bits. I really hope the Glyn Valley Tramway preservationists all the luck in the world, and I would love to see a working replica of one of these wee beasties. Take my money, quick, build one. Ben Wiles asked about profitability. In the United Kingdom, it was very likely the London and North Western Railway, the self-styled Premier Line, which was the largest joint stock company in the country, and one which regularly turned in a profit of 4 to 5% for its shareholders in its debenture stock. And that was largely thanks to the very frugal management of people like Moon, the managing director, who worked out they could make maximum profit by running trains to a minimum level of service which the passengers would accept. So the London North Western run very frugally, had very cheap, nasty locomotives. Well, I say cheap and nasty, they did their job. And they were running express trains which galloped along about 45 to 50 miles an hour, which people like Webb had worked out was the optimum speed in terms of cost and repair, and the minimum speed at which the general public would accept a train being run, especially an express train. Sam Rahan asked about railway history books. Well, Simon Bradley's book is a very useful starting point as an introductory text. It's not very strong on the early period, but as an overview of British railway history, this is absolutely excellent. For the Victorian period, where is it? Ah, here we are. Jack Simmons' book on the Victorian Railway. Sorry about the slight interference, but yeah, excellent introduction on the Victorian Railway. And in terms of locomotives, the best you can possibly do is get Dr. Michael Bailey's Locomotion. Angry Scar Lowy asked about working conditions, and in one word, awful. The train crews were paid for the number of trips made per day rather than miles run or the hours at work. On the Liverpool and Manchester Railway, we know that some locomotives like Line and its sister Mammoth were in steam from between 17 and 19 hours 55 minutes a day. And the crews would have been with them whilst the engines were in steam. On the North Midland Railway, the engine drivers were recorded as regularly working shifts over 12 hours, and in some instances were on duty for 24 hours. And you couldn't take a nap, as being asleep on the job was a punishable offence, and in fact it was a sackable offence for many railways, so you couldn't even, in between trips, take a quick nap on the tender. You had to stay awake and stay alert. And remember, these shifts were done on a locomotive without a cab or anything in terms of weather protection other than your cap and a greatcoat. And very often locomotive crews had to buy their own uniform, or it came out of stoppages taken out of their pay. As an example, engineman John Thomas, who worked on the Manchester, Sheffield and Lincolnshire Railway, now that became the Great Central, records in his diary for him a typical day's work. Gorton, 13th June 1860. On duty 7 a.m. Left Manchester 7:50 a.m. to Lincoln with passenger. Then to Retford empty. To Barnsley with goods. To Lincoln empty. To Manchester with 22 coaches on. Arrived Manchester 11 p.m. Finished Gorton, signed off 12 midnight. Went out again at 3:45 again on the 14th. It's an incredibly long working day with hardly any rest periods in between. It's hardly any surprise that railway work was so dangerous with an incredible amount of accidents. And this is a little booklet produced by the Great Western Railway in the turn of the Edwardian period. And this is an account of 1 month's personal accidents on the Great Western Railway. This is for October of 1913. General summary of accidents. Passenger department. Killed 4 men. Injured 134. Goods department. No men killed. 260 injured. Locomotive and carriage department. No men killed. 332 men injured. Engineering department. 2 men killed, 183 injured. Signal department, no men killed, 25 men injured. In total, that is 6 men killed on the railway in 1 month, and 934 men were injured. It's nearly 1,000 people working on the railway killed or injured as late as 1913. And that's for 1 month. Railway work was incredibly dangerous with very long hours, and the concept of health and safety work at work and pretty much didn't exist until booklets like this from the Great Western came along, or this from the London and North Western really didn't exist, and trade union representation was pretty poor, to be honest. However, the picture was brighter in Europe, and if you cross the channel to France, French law stated a maximum working day of 11 hours. Overtime was strictly regulated. You couldn't pull a double shift. Rest days were guaranteed to locomotive crews with at least 3 rest days per month. Warm clothing was guaranteed and was provided by the railway companies. And in winter, hot wine or hot chocolate was provided by the railway companies in cold weather. And there was also a stronger trade movement representation on the French railway. So it's a mixed picture. But in Britain, certainly, absolutely awful working conditions. Thomas Shafto asked about early monorails. The earliest I know was a suspension monorail, so the monorail was above ground with everything hanging down. I'll put a picture on. Patented in 1821 by a chap called Henry Robinson Palmer, and it was tested in Woolwich in London, and he advocated its use for military railways. And the design was developed in the 1820s with a full-scale test undertaken in about 1824 in London, and in the 1825 in Germany, and also in Russia. Finally, more coffee. I'm not an addict. Finally, a question from Jenny Garrett about the Fox Aurora Museum. Yes, I am the museum manager at Foxfield. I absolutely loved my job, and I am delighted to be managing the museum. The oldest objects in the museum collection are track components from the 1790s. So talking about plateway rails, cast iron, 3 foot length, and amongst that collection we have stone sleeper blocks, and amazingly enough, we have incredibly rare early points, which are cast iron and wrought iron. I think my favourite object is either North Staffordshire Railway number 2. She's a terrible mongrel of a thing. It's not really number 2 at all, if you go by the frames. And I did a video about her and the new L class. She's wonderful. She's big. She's so beautiful. She's ugly. Big dark red thing. So it's either number 2 or it's an engineman's log sheet from the North Staffordshire Railway from 1859. It records his working day. It records signing on duty, signing off duty. He was working a goods train, taking coal wagons from collieries around Stoke as far as Crewe and coming back again. His first trip out, he's delayed by 30 minutes. On his way back, he's delayed by 25 minutes. There's late collections. It's the type of thing which usually doesn't survive. It's paperwork, it's ephemera. But it's a very tangible object to the working life of a Victorian engineman in the North Staffordshire Railway. I love it to bits. I think the other favourite exhibit in the museum is Rom River. She's a diesel. Yeah, I admit it, she's a diesel. I like early diesels. And she's the first purpose-built diesel locomotive in the world, built in Stoke-on-Trent in 1929. She's a wonderful, wonderful piece of engineering. So I hope I've been able to answer as many of your questions to the best of my ability. I hope seeing my mug on camera hasn't scared you away. Thank you everyone who subscribed, everyone who sent a question, for all your support, all your love over the last 18 months for Rail Story. Thank you for all your comments and questions. If you've liked this two-camera format, please drop me a question in the comment below, and I'll see how brave I'm feeling, and whether you want some more on character bits, and whether we actually want to start introducing lives into rail stories, like doing top 5 early locomotives, top 5 carriers and things like that. Do let me know in the comments. I just want to say thank you to everyone, and that's me, Anthony Dawson, signing off for now. Thank you all very much.